Nuno Cunha Rodrigues, welcome to Digital Markets Research Hub. It's a great opportunity to ask a couple of questions about the functioning of the Portuguese Competition Authority, European competition law, and the issues which influence the evolution of these institutions and the system overall. I wanted to begin this conversation with inviting you to provide to us kind of more encyclopedic background information about the Portuguese Competition Authority, its main focuses, main interests, its structure, and its institutional setting.
Okay, thank you all for inviting me. It's a real pleasure to be here in your podcast. As you know, I'm a huge fan of your podcast and I always learn from it. Regarding the Portuguese Competition Authority, the Portuguese Competition Authority, the AdC, Autoridade da Concorrência in Portuguese, was created in 2003, so it was already 22 years ago, in the context of the approval of the famous Reg 1. It's the sole competition law enforcer in Portugal, and we are only dedicated to competition. So we don't do consumer protection differently from other countries. For example, in Italy or in Poland or in the Netherlands, they also have consumer protection in the mandate of the authority. Here in Portugal, we are just focused on competition law and the enforcement of competition law. We have discretion to set up our priorities. We are an independent body, not only because it's stated in the Portuguese law, but also we are aware that nowadays, following the approval of the ECN Plus Directive, the Directive 2019/1, it's mandatory to provide within the member states for the competition authorities with independent, that means the sufficient financial and human resources to fulfill their task. Within the authority, the Portuguese one, we have 4 core units: the Anti-Competitive Practice Department, the Antitrust, the Merger Control Department, the Studies and Market Monitoring Bureau, and the Legal Department, which handles with court proceedings. So it's, I would say, a very simple organization, but at the same time, very complex one. We have around 100 highly motivated staff, brilliant people, I must say, many of them with high qualifications, with master in law, PhDs in economics, in law. We have data scientists also working with us. And that's the way we do our activity. We have several cases that I would say are very important cases, not only for the Portuguese economy, but also when it comes to competition law. They are, I would say, landmark cases in terms of the EU or in Europe more broadly. We've had just last year, for example, a cartel for the provision of clinical analysis in the context of the COVID-19 situation. That was a cartel concerning price fixing and market sharing that really harmed consumers in a difficult time that was during the pandemic. And so this case resulted in a high volume of fines that were imposed by the Portuguese authorities, around 50 million euros that were imposed. In the merger control side, I would like to highlight our decision last year regarding the prohibition of the acquisition of Novo by Vodafone. This was in the telecom sector, so we blocked this merger in the telecom sector, as in our opinion, it would likely generate a series of unilateral effects and coordinated effects with adverse impact on customers in Portugal. This was an interesting case because we blocked it, and people were saying this was a 4-3 merger. Vodafone is the 3rd biggest operator in Portugal, and Novo was the 4th one, the challenger, I would say. And so there was a discussion if we should block or not block this merger. The thing is that our analysis concluded that it would create these unilateral effects and coordinated effects. We blocked the merger, and 1 month after, this 4th operator was bought by another one, Digi, which is a famous Romanian telecom operator, and this helped to create a new competitive market in terms of the telecom sector. And I think it was good for the competitiveness of the telecom sector in Portugal. So this was an important decision that we took last year. Also, we've been trying to have a more dynamic approach. I would say this word of the idea of more dynamic approach is quite trendy nowadays when it comes to ex-officio detection. So we are using nowadays AI tools. We have created platforms based on AI in order to help our activities. So we have now 3 platforms based on AI, which we label it as Detect IT, Screen IT, and Scrap IT. The Detect IT platform is used for gun jumping. So we are able to, through the use of artificial intelligence, catch all the news that are issued on a daily basis. We cross it also with the commercial registry, with information that is provided by the Securities Exchange Commission. So on a daily basis, this platform detects some cases. Some are false positives sometimes, so we need a human approach also to make it a more accurate approach. But we're able up until now this year to detect 5 gun jumping situations based on this Detect IT platform. Another one is the Screen IT, which serves to identify collusive behavior between companies in public contracts. So we have a connection with the public procurement database that is available online. We are able to go also to private information in terms of public procurement and try to have some screening, behavioral screening, structural screenings that we do in terms of public procurement database in order to find some tip-off, some suspicious patterns that after we can investigate a bit more to open cases, namely in the context of bid reading cases. And then the third platform, the Scrap IT, is used to collect online data to monitor the prices charged by online sellers and to identify signs of price fixing. And so we are very, we think that these new tools are quite helpful for the success of the work of the authority. And this is an example how AI can be used internally by authorities nowadays. Also, when it comes to advocacy, we've got, I think, a very important track record, and namely in the last year, in market studies, we've done one on electric mobility, for example, charging points for electric cars. We made several recommendations to the government, to the municipalities in this context. We are doing another one on the railway sector, another one that is being done on the banking sector, a market study also. And we issued a series of papers regarding the interplay between competition and generative AI. The first issues paper was published in November 2023. It was awarded by the ICN as one important study in terms of advocacy in the ICN meeting that happened in Brazil in the beginning of 2024. And after that issues paper that was published in the end of the year 2023, we were, I think, also with the CMA, the 2 first authorities to focus on the impacts of competition in generative AI and the problems that it poses in the different stack of the AI, from the chips to the access to data, to cloud computing, all the possible impacts that the AI stack can have in competition. So we've got 3 other short paper series that will publish in the year of 2024 and 2025 regarding the impacts of generative AI to access to data, another one on open models in AI, and the third one on labor markets. And we are on the point to publish another short paper series, hopefully until the end of this year, about the impact on the market of microchips, GPUs, which is quite famous, I would say, nowadays. So another thing that we are pursuing, and I think it's important to an authority to do, is to have outreach initiatives. To leave the headquarters of an authority, our work is about consumers, it's about citizens, it's about firms. So we have to leave our headquarters and go and talk to people. So we've been doing that throughout Portugal. We have an initiative that started 2 years ago that aims once per month to visit a city in Portugal, the 20 more important cities. We talk with municipalities They bring us local associations of consumers, of companies, and we explain that then the benefits of competition and the risks of infringement of competition law. And it's interesting because in those, I would say, meetings and that we have once per month, sometimes we receive some tip-offs of possible cartels that happens in a local base, and people they tell us, we didn't know that you were coming from the capital to this place. We didn't know that you could also investigate local cartels, and of course we do. So I think it's important to promote these outreach initiatives, and I've been saying that to my colleagues in our authorities. So in this year of 2025, we also started another campaign that is called Competition Plus, that is focused specifically on bid reading, labor market, and sustainability. And this is a campaign that it's targeted to some specific stakeholders, associations, firms, and it also aims to explain them how the risks of infringement of competition law, and also our approach providing guidance, namely in terms of sustainability. We've done that with a recommendation about the interplay between sustainability and competition, labor markets, and also bid reading. It's important also, I think, to provide guidance to firms. Of course, we need to investigate, to detect infringements of competition law, but also to provide guidance for firms. And that's what also we've been doing there. So also, I think in a nutshell, that's the work that we've been doing here in Portugal.
This is a genuinely impressive outline of genuinely impressive activities which the authority is engaged with, or even initiate and pioneers and champions in Europe and beyond, primarily though in Portugal, of course. And let me ask you, I will have a follow-up questions on several aspects, including public procurement and the role of AI, detecting models, and some other matters which you have highlighted. But I wanted, just as a matter of clarification, I wanted to learn your intuition and your experience and your understanding of how the role, how should the competition agency interact with the government. We've been living in the period where the answer was pretty much axiomatic. We rely on the neutral, objective metrics of economics, and we have to insulate ourselves from any political noise because it blurs the clarity of our impartial kind of objective standard measurements. Now this canonical perception has been somehow challenged or undermined. We understand that the truth has several more or less equally plausible interpretations, and it's the competition agency, particularly such powerful and enthusiastic. Do you have to know your limits? Do you want to go beyond? Do you want to advise government not only just as box ticking exercise, but rather inform them? Do you want maybe to incorporate the broader agenda into your activities and thus portraying and acting not only as just competition protection sensu stricto agency, but also as a co-shaper of competition and broader market structures in Portugal and beyond?
It's a very interesting question, always. And I think I need time to answer it. First of all, there's the risk nowadays of politicization of competition agency. And we've seen that in several jurisdictions nowadays. You see the example in the UK. We know what happened in the UK with the CMA. We see now in Mexico, where COFECE has ended and they have started a new authority, the CNA, not to confuse with the CMA, it's the Comisión Nacional Antimonopolio, and in the US. Of course, in the European Union, we are somehow shielded by the ECN Plus directive, which I mentioned previously. But on the other hand, like you said, we cannot live in a bubble. As authorities, we don't live in a bubble. So let me start by saying that we need always to explain to people the difference between competition policy and competition law. I think the role of a competition agency is to enforce the law. We are abide by the law, so we enforce competition law. When it comes to competition policy, that's another discussion that we can have. namely nowadays in Europe in the context of the Letter Report and the Draghi Report, and the role that the governments want to competition policy to have. So what's our role as a competition agency in this context? I think we have a role. First of all, we promote competition. We just don't investigate cases. So we have a role in order to detect possible barriers to entry, barriers to expansion, existence of bottlenecks, for example, in the law, in the markets, and we can help governments, in their role by issuing recommendations, and we need that in Portugal in order to have a better competitive atmosphere, I would say, and a more open markets in order to promote our economy. So we have a role there in order to help the government. We are an independent authority in Portugal, similar to other countries, but I think, again, that we shouldn't live in a bubble. So we need to have an open dialogue, not only with the government, but also with the courts, with the parliament, and we've been doing that in Portugal. But when it comes nowadays with these new problems, I would say that the competition policy or competition law is called to solve, first of all, we should not blame competition law for all the mistakes or for all the things that have happened. For example, the lack of innovation within the EU. It's easy to blame on competition, but it's not competition law fault. Sometimes it's a problem of the political will within the EU, the need to have a strong political will in EU in order to have, for example, more venture capital within the EU. That's a problem when compared with the US. So we can contribute to that dialogue in order to have a better industrial policy, for example, embed with competition policy. Another thing is that sometimes we discuss, labor markets and sustainability, why are they in the agenda of the authorities? Because we are enforcing the law. And that's what we are doing. It's not something new, I would say. For example, when it comes to labor markets, in labor markets, the way that we see labor markets, for example, in Portugal, is similar to the approach that we have in a buyer's cartel. When you have a buyer's cartel, you are buying an input, for example, raw materials that it's needed for the productions of goods and services. And when you're doing a cartel, for example, that stops workers' mobility, because a no-poach agreement, that's what it does, it's affecting an input to the production of goods and services. So it's not something new. We are enforcing the law. We have to enforce the law, and we have to tackle all these no-poach and wage-fixing agreements that might appear. When it comes to sustainability, for example, also, there's a risk of greenwashing by companies, of using these ideas, this green approach to economy to disguise somehow possible cartels. So again, we are enforcing the law, and we have to do that as an authorities. We cannot hide ourselves in a bubble and say, we are just doing the bread and butter investigations. So it's our role, it's our mandate. It's not something that we have to say, we are expanding, we are expanding the frontiers of the mandate of the authorities. No, I think it's our role also to deal with these issues. Again, labor markets, sustainability, generative AI, because those are problems that affect competition, that affect consumers at the end. So, trying to make it short, always, our role as an authorities is clear in our mandate. In Portugal, we are independent, but I think, in my opinion, that we cannot live in a bubble. We have to keep an open dialogue with the government, the parliament, and the courts, knowing the point where we stand, each one of us, knowing that the competition authorities must be independent, but must contribute to have a more competitive economy, more competitive markets. I hope I was clear enough.
You were very clear, Nuno. My next question is about your another or concurrent role, namely you are also vice chair of the ICN. And my question is, well, I have several questions, but let me combine it into one. First of all, again, maybe on a more encyclopedic level, please remind to us the main agenda of ICN, its mission and mandate. What do you plan to achieve? How maybe in comparison with OECD competition division, so that we can understand some differences from comparative perspective. And also I wanted to ask you a question which concerns me intuitively. We have 100 plus competition agencies in the world with a different degree of maturity. Do you see, do they speak the same language? Do they have to speak the same language? Is this common denominator of ability to speak to use the vocabulary of antitrust allows us to share best practices? What is the overall objectives of this collaboration? Should we try to pursue this kind of Bretton Woods agenda, or we have to somehow be mindful that each agency is primarily interested in pursuing their domestic competition policy, which can be different in different jurisdictions depending on the circumstances in their domestic markets and in their domestic country more generally?
Very interesting questions that you are asking. I have to divide them. First of all, the role of the ICN and the difference between the ICN and the OECD. I'll say, first of all, the OECD is an international organization that is established. It's based in Paris, and it's established in order to promote economic cooperation among its members. That cooperation is much based on technical assistance and technical work. And the OECD has always these cutting-edge papers that are very important. Whenever you want to learn, and I would say to all your audience, I would say that you should look at the recommendations, which are somehow the best practices that the OECD provides in all fields in terms of competition law, and they are very useful. When it comes to the ICN, the role of the ICN is not so much to provide this technical assistance to issue the recommendation best practice, but differently, it's to promote a debate among the authorities, to promote a knowledge, a share of knowledge between authorities and its members, so that we can get in touch between all of us, that we know face to face who we are, and that we can create trust among us in order to expand the cooperation that we have. Of course, also we are saying the maturity of the different agencies worldwide. Yes, we know that. There are authorities that are involved in regional agreements, like in the EU. We are part of the EU. There are other ones that are more isolated, for example, in African countries, in Latin American countries. But first of all, the language, and this is very interesting in terms of competition, the language is quite similar. Whenever you talk to more than 140 jurisdictions about abuse of dominant position, about a cartel, they all know what that is. Of course, then the approach when it comes to the investigation can be different. For example, we know that in South Africa they have these public interest clauses that allows them, even the authority, to promote somehow or to introduce a competition policy perspective in their enforcement, I would say. Also in the US somehow. So of course there are different approaches worldwide. But what brings us together in the work of the ICN is that we all want to promote competitions, because we know that by promoting competition, we are helping our national and regional economies. And that's a common sense that we have at the ICN. Nowadays, the ICN has changed its leadership. I think you are aware of. Andreas Munt, the former ICN chair, stepped down, and we have André Marvin from the COFECE, nowadays the CNA. The Mexican authority has a chair of the ICN. The ICN has in its work not only the famous meeting once per year that happens. I think you were there always in the Edinburgh just this year, but we also have different working groups. A working group for advocacy, another one for agency effectiveness, another one for cartel, another one for merger, and another one for unilateral conduct. So we have 5 working groups that also meet once per year somewhere in the world in order to discuss a more narrow topic as these ones. And so I think that helps the younger agencies to go through the learning curve, to learn from other more mature agencies, to exchange information, to exchange knowledge, to know face to face, so that after we can pick up the phone and answer and call authorities. Because also nowadays, cartels are not so much national, they are cross-border cartels. Mergers are not only national, they are international mergers. And for that, you have to have a collaboration and share of knowledge. For example, when it comes to remedies, to the application of remedies, you can discuss remedies on a national base, but if it's international merger, you have to talk with other jurisdictions. With cartels, in Portugal, for example, we have an investigation last year of a cartel that involved other jurisdictions in Latin America. So we have to talk to them. And for that, the ICN it's a very important forum so that we have knowledge of each one of us. Although it's not an organization, international organization has the OECD is. It's a network, as it's labeled. So in a nutshell, that's what I can say about the ICN and the difference with the OECD also.
Thank you very much. That's very, very informative and clear. Zooming in a little bit, but still remaining within the institutional structure, I wanted to ask you also a question about the Portuguese-speaking, I don't know, microcosm or world. For an outsider, it sounds like something very romantic, almost nostalgic, but it's also a very, very powerful global community. I wonder if, as a matter of curiosity, if the very fact that you share language and background, cultural archetypes, does it influence the closeness of collaboration? Does it allow you to collaborate in a more advanced fashion? And maybe you can illustrate.
Yes, it's a very interesting question also. You know, in Portugal, we are very proud of our history. We have, a history of almost 9 centuries in Portugal, and we are proud how we help to open the world, to open to new societies, new cultures. And there are several Portuguese-speaking jurisdictions worldwide. In Asia, East Timor, in Africa, we have 5 countries, and Brazil, of course. We share the same language, and also, especially when it comes to African countries, they are much influenced by the Portuguese law. And that affects, of course, competition law. In those countries, they are very influenced by the Portuguese Competition Law Act. And so I would say that in those countries, they have started recently to approve the approval of competition law acts internally and the creation of competition authorities. For example, in Angola, they have created a new authority in 2018, in Mozambique in 2021, and in Cape Verde in 2023. So those are recent authorities, I would say. For example, in the case of Angola, and I would say now Mozambique, they are very mature agencies. They went quickly through the learning curve. And for that, we are also providing some technical assistance. We have a memory of understanding with all the authorities. We created the so-called Lusophone competition networks that meets usually one time each 2 years. But on a daily basis, we have a close relation with them. We are developing, for example, a joint project with the Angolan Competition Authority on assessing the competitive impact of public policies that is being funded by the European Union, which includes workshops and a job shadowing experience for 2 experts of the Competition Authority from Angola in Portugal. Usually we receive some staff from those authorities here in Portugal in order to provide them with the technical assistance and experience. Some of the Portuguese staff from the AdC go to those countries in order also to share some knowledge and experience. And now we are starting to do that also with East Timor in Asia. And so I think there is somehow, I would say, an atmosphere, a hub of competition law among Portuguese-speaking countries. And I think it's important. I do think, and it's our priority always to promote this type of cooperation because it's important also to help those countries with the Portuguese experience and the way that we went through the learning curve here in the Portuguese Authority. Also, Brazil has a very important role in that context. CAGI is a very well-known competition agency in Brazil. They have a very impressive track record, and they are also helping with their experience all these Portuguese-speaking countries. So, of course, we have the languages is the same, and it helps. It helps for that. Also, the role I would also add always the role of the UNCTAD in this field. UNCTAD, we didn't speak about UNCTAD, is based in Geneva and has a very important role when it comes to developing competition in developing countries. But just by coincidence, the head of the UNCTAD nowadays is a Portuguese well-known lady, Teresa Moreira, and she's also very in close contact with the Portuguese authority and with those countries in order to promote competition there.
This is really impressive how it evolves in parallel with other tracks. And let us move to the other track, to Europe, and to the one of the most obvious questions which concerns so many, the new recalibration of the relationship between competition and industrial policy. Let us focus on digital, implying that digital infrastructure is an exit to other industries as well. So three kind of dimensions of the question. A normative one, you're a law professor, so normative one, how far should it go? How far should we go in trying to open up each other to kind of to pursuing this joint efforts of kind of more tailored, more strategically planned competition policy, A. B, how far can we go? How far do we have the capacity to, how much can we change this markets? And the third question, more you as an enforcer, how far do we want to go as competition agencies with trying to kind of to recalibrate the law of gravitation?
Well, the first question, the law perspective that you are asking always, I always keep reminding people when it comes to industrial policy that we have to look at the treaty on the function of the European Union. The legal basis for the EU to promote industrial policy is stated in Article 173. That's the legal basis for industrial policy. And number 3 of Article 173 says the thing, I'm quoting by mind, I don't have the treaty here, that industrial policy should not distort competition. So it's the treaty itself that it's saying that competition policy should be embedded into industrial policy. So this debate about how industrial policy should be separate from competition policy, I think it's wrong, even from a legal perspective, because the treaty says that should not distort competition. Of course, in Europe, we have an instrument that distorts competition when it comes to industrial policy, which is state aid. You know, state aid is a way to distort competition. But that's a more, a debate that it's in terms of a competition agency, we should not step in because it's something for the mandate of the European Union to pursue and not in the context of a mandate of an authority. But then when it comes to our role as an agency and our role in this debate around how fast can we go that you're asking me, first of all, we have to remind people that competition has a role to play in good industrial policy design, in particular by addressing market failures and reducing barriers to entry, expansion, and innovation. You know, we need competitive markets in order to help innovation to flourish. One of the problems of the EU is that we are staying behind when it comes to innovation. There's a famous joke, you know, that it's said in the corridors of Brussels, that the USA, they innovate, China produces, and the EU regulates. So we need to reshuffle these things, and we need the EU to innovate and to produce. But for that, we need competition policy, and has an important role, namely in order to help markets to be contestable. And we have to remind people that if the industrial policy conducts or leads to a situation where markets are not contestable, that will not help the European economy. For example, there was a famous debate, around, I would say, 6 years ago about the Siemens-Alstom merger, and the need to create an European champion, and we needed the industrial policy in that case, and that competition policy or competition law was harming the need to have an European champion. And you know that by that time the Commission blocked this merger of Siemens and Alstom. What happened after? Well, we don't have an European champion. We have 2 European champions, Siemens and Alstom. They are doing well worldwide. So it was important competition policy in that case it didn't harm this idea of the need to have an European champion or to have a better industrial policy. So I think it's essential nowadays to ensure that firms compete on the merit. They are not privileged. We need, as a competition agency, to contribute to the promotion of competition policy, to embed competition policy into industrial policy, so that by doing that, we help markets to be more contestable and more functioning. Of course, we need also, that's another question that you were asking, to make it in a speedy way. Why? Namely, when it comes to digital markets, nowadays, they are fast evolving markets. You know, technology is always changing suddenly. Now we have this generative AI, which can be a new technology and where markets can tip easily, you know. So we need to be, you know, to watch careful for what happens in those markets and to use our toolbox in order to go as fast as those markets go. And that's sometimes one of the problems of enforcing competition law, is that sometimes it takes too long to investigate. We know that. So we need to, you know, to balance the need to work in a speedy way with the need to have a robust enforcement, you know. So always, I think I tried to cover all the questions, but let me know if I didn't answer one of them.
No, you did answer all of them, and yet I have a follow-up one. Using the vocabulary or terminology of sports and champions, I maybe I wanted just to ask you. You're also an expert on public procurement and foreign subsidies, and many people see them as kind of two phenomena. The first as a doping in sports. So some jurisdictions just inject prohibited, elements, chemicals to their teams in order to make their champions fitter, faster, more agile, and more aggressive, perhaps. So if everybody is doing it, or the top tier companies or the top tier players in the Champions League are doing it, should we just sit on our hands and promote the amateur sport and just competition, like atomistic competition? The doping problem. And the second problem is kind of we play an amateur league and then somebody like a billionaire purchases our rival team, our rival club, and they start outperforming us on the merits. They are just stronger, they purchasing better players, and they have better kind of recreational atmosphere, etc., etc. So they just receiving more support. Should we just try and hard, waking up earlier and working harder, or maybe we have to somehow reciprocate in order to continue playing and in order to nurture competition in the global sense?
Yeah, those are many questions and many problems that you rose. Now, let me start by the doping problem. The EU is an example or a paradox example where among the EU there is a regime, the state aid regime, that prohibits member states to provide financial assistance to their national firms. You don't have a similar regime in other jurisdictions worldwide. You don't have in the US, you don't have. So we have it here. And that might be the case that some states that have a more financial power, you know, than others, I would say big states within the EU compared with the smaller and medium states like Portugal, have that financial power, that firepower that can help national authorities, although state aid regime is of course submitted to the approval of the Commission according to Article 107, number 3. So this can create an unbalanced internal market, internal market. So how can we solve that? I think the problem is that the EU sometimes is very good in planning, but it's bad in executing. We have several areas where the EU is still uncompleted, is still to be completed. For example, the European Monetary, the EMU, the Economic and Monetary Union, it's still to be completed. The Economic and Monetary Union was created as a replica of the famous optimal currency areas that were designed by Blundell, the economic prize in 1967 in the US. But the EU is not an optical currency area. So we have cultural barriers, language barriers. And so the Economic and Monetary Union, it's not working properly. The banking union is still to be completed. The capital markets union, it's still to be completed. Now we have the saving and investment union. That we have a fragmented internal market. And all these it's impeding the internal market to function, and it's affecting that idea of the state aid, because at the end, those financial, more powerful countries are able to provide their national economies with financial assistance through the use of the state aid mechanisms than the small and mediums. So how can we, first of all, solve this internally? That's the point of the Draghi report. So we need competition policy to be embedded in other policies. We need to make a deeper internal market, and for that we need political will. And then it comes with the competitiveness of the EU when it vis-a-vis third world countries. And that's when it comes to foreign subsidies and all that. Because we created this system internally that prohibits member states to provide financial assistance, but in third countries, they are providing assistance to their firms that are at the same time competing in the internal market. Because many times in the past, the European Union was somehow what I would call a white angel in international trade. We also, oh, let's not reciprocate, let's not behave, if other countries are protectionist and are pursuing protectionist measures, let's not do that because we are the EU. We follow the rule of law. We don't want to do a tick for tack policy. But now I think the EU woke up and said, no, it's a different world we live now. So we need to create a level playing field for all the firms that are performing internally. And that's the idea behind the foreign subsidies regulation. But on the other hand, this doping that you were saying at the beginning of the question, it's somehow affecting the competitiveness of countries worldwide. So the problem now is, how can we have competitive companies within the EU that can compete worldwide in third countries with those local firms that are being subsidized by the national government, that they don't have to face the same level of regulation or regulatory measures that we have in the EU. And for that, again, I think competition law, competition policy have a role there. We have a role in order to detect which kind of competition of regulatory measures are really needed or not needed, in order to have a more competition-friendly environment, in order to help European companies to compete worldwide. And for that, I think we need not to have less regulation. I don't think the EU is over-regulating. We have to remind also that if the EU doesn't regulate, the alternative is to have 27 regulations on a national basis. So I think we need to regulate, but we need to better regulate. So I think the problem is not less regulation. I think the solution is to have better regulation. Better regulation, to have political will to implement the Draghi proposals, to always remind people that competition policy is needed and it has to be embedded with all this type of the rest of the policies, to create a level playing field in the EU to all the companies to compete, EU companies and non-EU companies, in order to promote our economy, our European economy, and to help to solve this innovation gap that we are facing nowadays in Europe. So I don't know if I answer your questions. No, I was thinking in several topics that I think are important for the problems that the European Union is facing nowadays.
I'm sorry, but you did. DMA as a kind of one of the children of this new perspective, new perception of competition policy being more agile, more tailored, and more asymmetric to mitigate or to tackle the systemic asymmetries in the market and in the relationship between the agencies, the Commission and the regulatees, the mightiest companies. Two questions. One is about of course, the openness, the fairness and contestability are two open textured goals of the DMA. In my view, they are open textured for the right reason. From pure academic, that's my academic opinion. I don't think it's possible to have it clear cut, and it's not even desirable. It's prudent decision to make them open textured. How do you read this openness, this fairness and contestability objectives, two strategic objectives, two main objectives of the DMA? And how do you see the role of national competition authorities in helping or collaborating with the Commission to pursue these two goals?
first question about the DMA, I think it's a very important instrument nowadays to tackle some of the problems that digital markets are posing. You know, the DMA came as an answer to some of the problems that a typical enforcement of competition law was posing to authorities. You know, the cases on Article 102 sometimes take too long. I remind you that the Intel case is pending in the Supreme Court for almost 20 years. You know, we have cases that they take too much time, really. And digital markets are fast evolving markets. So I think we really needed an instrument that would be, you know, more fast in order to tackle the problems that digital market can pose. So this idea of bringing fairness and constitutability to markets, that it's one of the goals of the DMA. I think it was a goal that is well perceived in the DMA, and it is an important goal in order to assure that. If that's being accomplished or not accomplished through the use of DMA, that's another question. We have the gatekeepers, you know, we have the 7 gatekeepers. One of the things that is being said nowadays is that, you know, the DMA is not nationality neutral. You know, it's all about American firms. 5 out of the 7 gatekeepers are American firms. Only Booking and ByteDance are not. But one interesting thing that was said just recently in the conference by a high-level staff from the Commission, Alberto Bachiaga, and I don't know if you're aware of that, is that knowing that 75% of the companies that are gatekeepers are American ones, at the same time, 75 of the small and medium firms that are pushing the Commission to apply the DMA are American firms. So it's not about nationality. So again, we've seen some decisions that were recently taken to firms to comply, the April decision and the Meta decision. And I think the DMA, it's a very important instrument. It's a blend between an ex-ante approach to regulation to an ex-post idea of enforcement. We are lawyers. Sometimes we call it, when we don't know how to qualify something, we call it a tertium genus, you know, or sui generis. So it's a sui generis regulation approach. But I think it's good. And the DMA, it's a very important legal instrument, which I will include nowadays in the competition law legal ecosystem. I call it nowadays the competition 2.0. You know, it's a new legal ecosystem of competition law. You know, sometimes I ask myself, if a lawyer from the 90s was transposed to nowadays, would he be able to understand competition law? Maybe not. Now, here the role of a national agency here. First of all, the DMA is under the mandate of the Commission, so it's up to the Commission to impose measures according to the DMA. But we have an open dialogue with the Commission. We still have the possibility to enforce Article 102 in digital markets. Sometimes there is what I would call it a gray line between the application of the DMA and the Article 102. And for that, we have an open dialogue with the Commission. If we want to start a case and we have some questions, if this is a case of compliance with the DMA or a case of 102, we talk with the Commission. I know that some of my colleagues in other agencies are sharing human resources, even with the Commission, in order to help them with the work in terms of the DMA. This is publicly known. For example, the Dutch authority and the Italian authority, they are doing that. Because again, also it's very interesting because the Commission, when it comes to the European Competition Network, is also another agency. It's a competition agency. We are at the end 28 agencies and not 27 because the Commission is also an agency. So we help each other in our work, and we can help the Commission in their work of applying the DMA. So yeah, in a nutshell, that's it all.
Do you think we often hear that it is a market harmonization measure, Article 114, the legal ground for adopting the DMA, and we often hear people saying that for example, like encouraging, or well, there's no room to encourage, it will emerge spontaneously, private enforcement of the DMA, it will lead to fragmentation. So I don't want to ask your opinion about the very phenomenon because it will be just forecast. I wanted to ask your observations as a head of the national agency. who are in continuous dialogue with other national competition authorities in the EU, within European Competition Network and beyond. Do you think that there is a big appetite for private litigation, standalone and follow-on injunctions and maybe damages? Do you think it will actually lead to fragmentation? Is this a kind of exaggeration by people who are negatively affected or their clients are negatively affected by the DMA, or it's a kind of it's an objective shortcoming?
This is an interesting question. I think it's still too early to understand and to know. But interestingly, just last year, some agencies, we organized a conference about the DMA in Amsterdam. So it was a joint event organized by the some of the agencies from the European Competition Network, Portugal, Spain, the Dutch, the Belgium. So it was like 7 or 8 of the agencies. So we organized a conference in Amsterdam about the DMA. And it was interesting because many stakeholders were saying that, they have now an opportunity to expand private enforcement in the context of the DMA. So many people are saying that, there's a huge opportunity, and there's the risk that you were saying of market fragmentation. I think we are still in an early stage, and I hope that that doesn't happen, that idea of market fragmentation within Europe, because it's contrary for the goal of the DMA, which is to have open markets, to have more open digital markets within the EU space. But at the end, when it comes to private enforcement, on the other hand, private enforcement is always national based. So there's a risk that you're saying. But again, from what I see, we are still in the early stage of that. It's just 1 year from now that it started, and I haven't heard anything special about that in the national level, at least in Portugal.
And the last question on the DMA, and then I will have a general conclusive question on the DMA. We know that the companies which are regulated are super skillful and they outperform in terms of their capacity and in terms of knowledge and expertise. And it's a whack-a-mole game, as has been famously observed by other peers, that it's impossible to go after them meaningfully. They will always find other way to circumvent in one way or another, in legally meaningful way of Article 114 of the DMA or beyond. So I was wondering whether this kind of adversarial approach would succeed, or rather we're doomed to sit behind a closed door maybe, and to find a kind of somewhere in between and strike a balance within the regulatory dialogue, which is a very toxic phrase these days. But I wanted to ask your opinion whether it's the least desirable, but the only plausible mechanism to change competition in digital markets, or we have to just be aggressive and try to be adversarial.
Well, I would say that the outcome of the DMA nowadays, it's good. I can highlight to you some examples that was recently shared by the European Commission regarding the application of the DMA. For example, and I have here with me, several alternative app stores are now available on Apple devices in Europe. Interoperability has been enhanced, namely in the case of the Apple app developers. Default apps and consumer choices have expanded. Alphabet, for example, no longer forces users to subscribe to Gmail to be able to use Android, YouTube, and Google Play. Data portability and control. Thanks to the DMA data portability obligation, it's now possible to transfer eSIMs from an Android phone to an iPhone and vice versa. Pricing also, for example, travel services companies across the EU are free to offer different prices and conditions on booking.com compared to their own direct sales channel, for example, their website or another online platform. So these are some examples of the things that were able to introduce in these markets thanks to the DMA. Of course, your Segos, those are powerful companies. They always know how to try to circumvent their obligation. But it's always like this in competition law. There is always a game, I would call it, of cat and mouse. Although the authorities cannot be a real cat because they're not so big, and they are not really mouses because they are much bigger than a mouse. But that's what we are trying to do, and the DMA is trying to do that through an ex-ante approach, through what you're saying, the regulatory dialogue that we be doing with the gatekeepers, and then to the use of enforcement. And I think the experience up until now of the application of DMA is rather successful. Let's see what will happen in the future. And we might have to fine-tune the DMA, and that it's the topic that is now being on the table, namely at the European Parliament, for example, with the appearance of artificial intelligence that was not known by the time that the DMA was approved. And so we might need to fine-tune. But again, I think that the DMA is a very important and powerful legal instrument in order to tackle some of the problems that this market poses nowadays.
Absolutely, I fully agree with this. You mentioned cat and mouse. Very quickly, if I may, about AI detection tools. Do you develop it on your own? Do you share it with other European competition agencies? What is the better way? What are the shortcomings? Is such collaboration, or is collaboration the only way to do it?
Very interesting question. In Portugal, we have hired human resources, data scientists with PhD, people with knowledge. We've done that. We expand our forensic IT team here, and we were able to create these IT tools that I mentioned to you at the beginning of our talk. So those are interesting tools, and then we are sharing our knowledge with other authorities, namely within the EU, but not only the EU, because in the context of the ICN and the last meeting that was organized in Edinburgh by the CMA, it was created a technological forum that gathers IT people from the authorities in order to share their experience. This happened one day before the meeting, the ICN meeting, and I know that it was very important. And now many agencies wanted to know the work that we've been doing in Portugal, and we are sharing our experience. We have no problem in sharing experience because we also want to learn from the others what they are doing. So that's the way we can improve our work, is by sharing. So we are sharing the experience when it comes to the IT tools that we created in Portugal, and also in the context of the ECN, the European Competition Network, we are also doing that. Again, it's a game of cat and mouse, so we need to share the experience of the cats so that everyone is able to catch their mouses.
But this system actually is one of the areas where we can definitely see cumulative effect, where all the agencies are united because they are trying to identify quasi-criminal bid rigging, quasi-criminal activity, or kind of cheating in its own right, and thus there could be genuine collaboration and sharing of expertise, accumulating knowledge and advancing it further. That's an amazing development.
Of course,
we have
bid rigging cases are classical cases worldwide. In all the states worldwide, they have bid rigging cases, I'm sure. So this is a way also to help our authorities to investigate in their national countries bid rigging cases, for example.
Absolutely. Last question before inviting you to let's combine it. I know that you're running out of time. Recommendations to students would be the last question. But before this, what would be the main issues which will preoccupy your academic mind and your enforcement mind in the following month?
When it comes to my role as an enforcer, I would say that merger control is always in the forefront, and antitrust. We have several cases. We have many cases that were open. We are on ongoing investigations. We are doing some downgrades. So I cannot speak openly about those cases, but those are cases that always, worry us in our authorities. When it comes to advocacy, this idea of helping to have more contestable markets is always on our mind. So we are doing that. Again, I mentioned in the beginning, markets that we have been doing in the railway sector, in the banking sector. So again, that's in our priorities. You asked me this recommendations for students. For students, I would say first we have to divide between graduation students and the students that are in their master in law and PhD. When it comes to graduation students, the advice that I would give is that try to study in advance. Try to follow the topics that your professors are lecturing about. If you know in advance what they will be speaking, it will be much more easy for you to capture what they are saying. So my advice is always try to study in advance. That will make your study much easier. And then when it comes to master in law and PhD students, my advice would be to choose a topic in their research that is as narrow as possible. That is very important so that you can guide your research and then expand it, of course. I always tell my students, to choose the topic that is as narrow as possible, not to choose a wide topic. It will not help. They'll get lost in their research. And any type of specific and as narrow as possible would be a very good topic, and it would help your research. And then to be enthusiastic about it. Never get depressed, because it's a long run. It's a marathon. It's a marathon. You have to run the marathon. At the end, it will be a joy when you reach the last stage. But so don't get demotivated. It's important to get enthusiastic about the topic that you choose, the narrow as possible, and to make a target and more guided research. Always. So in a short, that's my advice I would give to students.
Nuno Cunha Rodrigues, thank you very much for this fascinating conversation.
Thank you, Alice. It was my pleasure.